thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's continue that. You know, I am troubled. I said in my opening statement that while we're talking with Iran, they continue to enrich. I still don't understand how that happened. I just don't understand it. And you mentioned, Mr. Rademacher, the 123 agreement with the UAE. I had the UAE ambassador in my office, and he mentioned that agreement, which does not allow the UAE to enrich for peaceful purposes on their soil. Canada has nuclear weapons for peaceful purposes. They are not allowed to enrich on their soil. If we sign an agreement with Iran that ostensibly says, well, they can enrich on their soil, but only for peaceful purposes, how do we ever get any of the other countries to not enrich on their soil? Aren't we then opening the door to, you name it, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt? Why should any of those countries negotiate a deal where they will not be allowed to enrich on their soil for peaceful purposes when clearly we are giving it away to Iran?
I agree entirely with your question, and in fact, it was the point I was just making, that I think once the United States says we are prepared to accept enrichment in Iran, this whole effort over the past decade to stem the spread of that technology to other countries, it becomes untenable, because how do we explain to any other country that, especially allies, friends of the United States, you're our friend, so we're not going to let you have this technology. Now, Iran, we're prepared to let them have it. I couldn't write the talking points for our diplomats to explain to our allies why we don't trust them to have something that we trust Iran to have. So I think, what happens when we permanently accept enrichment in Iran is, by default, we have to accept it anywhere else that wants it. I don't know how, you can try and make it financially attractive for them to not go in that direction. But if for a country that's determined to have it, to tell them as a matter of policy, it's the policy of the United States that only Iran gets to have it and not you, I think it's not a case that you can persuasively make.
Rouhani has said to CNN that Iran won't dismantle a single centrifuge. The joint plan of action calls for a comprehensive solution that says that, quote, would ensure Iran's nuclear program will be exclusively peaceful. So is there a way to ensure that Iran's nuclear program will be exclusively peaceful without dismantling some centrifuges? Anybody care?
I think the number of centrifuges is extremely, there's no question, number of centrifuges is extremely important, certainly for the monitors. When you have a number of, and especially if they're even more sophisticated in their spinning and they're putting out that much more capability, absolutely, there's no question that the numbers are important.
Okay, let me talk about an editorial that was in the Washington Post a few weeks ago, 3 weeks ago perhaps. The editorial argued, and I said this in my opening statement, that we can afford to wait, that perhaps time is on our side if the date comes up in July and we don't have a comprehensive agreement, that it might be in the best interests of the United States to put it back another month or 2 or 3 or 4, that Iran is still undergoing a lot of economic difficulty as a result of the sanctions, and that we might have more leverage if we let the date lapse beyond the July 20th date. That was essentially a Washington Post editorial. Anybody have any thoughts on that? Mr. Heinemann.
First of all, we should not forget that this joint plan of action is very limited. Today, we don't know how many centrifuges Iran has. IAEA has got some declaration about the manufacturing of the replacements of the centrifuges, but it has not got the total number of centrifuges produced. So what's happening now in the next few months Iran is still likely building additional centrifuges. It's manufacturing components for the Arak reactor, and it maintains the skills of the labor. In addition, producing additional enriched uranium. So in my view, one should put a cap to this and not to wait. The problem doesn't become easier by waiting.
So you disagree essentially with what the Washington Post editorial said about the fact that Iran is still being hurt with sanctions, and that if we wait, they'll continue to be hurt, and time will not be on their side. You essentially disagree with that.
I think it's a little bit wishful thinking.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Engel.